Hi, everyone. I'm just going to give everybody a second to kind of file into the webinar here. You have arrived at another installment of WGF Library Script Breakdown. Hi, my name is Lauren O'Connor. I am a librarian at the Writers Guild Foundation Library. You may have noticed that my usual co-host is not here. Fellow librarian Javier Barrios had to evacuate last night due to the wildfires that are currently taking a big bite out of Los Angeles. So please send Javier your good vibes. And before we go any further, I just want to say I hope everybody who's watching this is staying safe. If you're in LA and you're lucky enough to be in your home with power watching this, we don't mind if you stay up to date, because we know things can change on a dime. And we're going to do our best, to give you an informative and hopefully distracting script breakdown. And I'll try to bring all the warmth and good humor that Javier would bring. Meanwhile, praying that both Dustin, my coworker, and I keep power. So thank you for being here. And if you want more information on the WGF Library, Dustin is going to put a link in the chat, and I hope you can take advantage of some of our resources. So now, if you've never watched a WGF Library script breakdown before, this is how it goes. We sit down on Zoom with a writer, and we go through their script with pages on screen, and we talk at length about how they wrote it. And for this session, we are delighted to welcome Peter Straughan. Did I say your last name right?
Straughan.
Straughan.
Yeah, that's okay.
Peter Straughan, to talk about his Golden Globe winning screenplay for Conclave, which is based on the novel by Robert Harris. And I hope everybody's had a chance to get familiarized with Peter's CV. You'll notice that he does a lot of adaptations, almost exclusively adaptations, right?
Mm-hmm.
Wolf Hall, Men Who Stare at Goats, Tinker Tailor Soldier Spy, to name a few. And adaptations, we haven't really covered a lot in our script breakdown, so we're really happy you're here, Peter, to talk about Conclave and your process. I'm going to give you a huge ASL round of applause. I hope everyone watching is doing the same. So our plan is to use the remainder of, I don't know, 90 minutes or so to kind of comb through the script and talk about it. Please know, for anybody watching this, we almost never have time for Q&A at the end of script breakdowns. There's just a lot to cover with the script. But just know, if you are watching this, we appreciate you so much, especially today. Please stay engaged in the chat, your observations and sharing resources, and just keeping this community going. That's all really, really wonderful. And also, let us know where you're watching from. If you're not watching from LA, I'll give a fist bump to whoever's watching from furthest away. So one final thing. After I ask a few introductory questions, we're going to put the script pages up on screen. But if you want to follow along in the script yourself, if Dustin hasn't done so already, he'll put that in the chat for you, so you can follow along on your own. That's about enough out of me. Peter Straughan, welcome again. Before we dive into the script, first of all, how are you doing?
I'm good. Thank you very much, Lauren. I'm fine.
So we like to start this with a few kind of context questions. So I'll just, we'll start really basic. Very simply, tell us how you got involved in the project, and more importantly, how you knew the Robert Harris novel Conclave was something that you wanted to adapt.
So there were two producers who I'd worked with before on two different projects. There was Robin Slovo, who I'd worked with on Tinker Tailor Soldier Spy, and then there was Tessa Ross, who I'd worked with on a film called Frank. And Tessa had been sent, I think, the first 3 chapters of Conclave when Robert was, I guess, still writing it. I don't think it was finished. And she immediately thought that there could be a film in this. So when she had the full manuscript, she sent it to me. She and Robin sent it to me to see what I thought. And I read it in a day. And it was very straightforward. It was very simple. I wanted to do it really, really quickly. I thought it was, I think Robert's a fantastic writer. It's very elegant. It was intelligent, but it was also quite gripping. It read like a thriller. It was page turner. And there were a few different sort of moments in the book that added up to me thinking, I mean, by the time I was halfway through, thinking I want to do this. One of which was the homily that Rafe's character Lawrence gives, which is "Give me a pope that doubts," which I found sort of quietly really interestingly subversive. That idea that, especially because this was 6 years ago, but I guess the political situation wasn't that different from the one we're facing now, of a very polarized world where people are certain that they're right and that the other side are idiots or evil. So it felt like a breath of fresh air to have a character that was standing for the position of, I don't necessarily know for certain what's right or what's the right thing to do, because it's a safer position for us all to be in there than to they're deciding that the other side are enemies.
For sure.
So I remember reading that and thinking, okay, I really like this. I really like this character. I want to do this. Yeah.
So it was at that moment you were like, yeah.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, and then there were, I didn't see what was coming all the way through.
Yeah.
So I guess that's hopefully, largely what the audience experienced watching the film. So that was kind of interesting. It felt like somebody mentioned an Emily Dickinson poem, which is "Tell the Truth, but tell it at a slant." And I liked that title, and I thought, yeah, that's what it felt like with Conclave. It felt like a way of looking at morality, felt like a way of looking at politics, but from an angle that maybe wasn't so familiar, because it was a world that we don't, know. And it was a kind of very pure way of looking at politics in a way, because it's so stark. Because I suppose because any failure and morality is such a startling kind of hypocrisy if your characters are supposed to be cardinals in the Catholic Church, So it's a very strong, dramatic kind of way of exploring those conflicts.
For sure. So you read the novel in one day. How many times do you think you, in this process, read the book?
Oh, God, I mean, it's a constant shuttling backwards and forwards so I mean, I probably read it a couple of times. So this is what normally happens. I read it once and think, oh, am I interested? I'll then read it again, kind of much more. And the first time I'm reading it just as a reader, Second time I'm reading it as a screenwriter. So I'll start to highlight moments and passages, lines, and it's in quite an ad hoc sort of way. Just anything that I feels filmic, I guess. It's one with anything that feels like, yeah, that's going to end up in the script. So that might be a line of dialogue, it might be an idea. Sometimes it's a whole scene, and then it depends really what the book is, what the process is going to be. So with Tinker Tailor, because I knew that with that whole, this is a dense, complex novel, I knew I was going to have to, I was writing it with my wife, we're going to have to sort of deconstruct it and then reassemble it. And there were lots of different ways that could be reassembled. And that was a big process of experimentation, because it's lots of stories within stories. So it's like, well, which one do you start with?
Do you outline? Are you somebody who does that rigorously? Or we get a lot of writers on here who are like, ugh, outlining. I don't do that.
I hate outlining.
Yeah.
I mean, I do it, but I hate it. I hate being forced to do it. I understand it depends. Sometimes I hate being forced to do an outline just because somebody's asking me to do it, whether I feel it's necessary or not, which, to be honest, doesn't happen that often, really. Often I think you have to do, with Tinker Tailor, we did various outlines because, again, we were trying to work out what's the optimum way of putting this story together. I also, with Tinker Tailor, used, corkboard and index cards with the scenes on and kept rearranging that. With Conclave, I didn't. Did I do an outline? I probably did no, I didn't do an outline really. I just started. I just writing. Because a lot of the architecture was there. I mean, one of the things that became apparent when I read the book was it was already running in my head like a film.
Yeah.
And and we made changes and I moved things around and added new things, but there was never a fundamental challenge in the structure in the way that sometimes there are with adaptations,
Well, I noticed when Javier and I were preparing for this, we read the script and we simultaneously read the book, and they're so similar. Like it feels like such an effortless adaptation, but I have a feeling it probably wasn't, so I'm excited to kind of get into
But
that.
it was an interesting journey because the first draft was close to the book, and then we
Mhm.
tried lots of different things. Generally, in the beginning and the end, we would try variations, and eventually we came back to something that was very close to that first draft. So we went on this big sort of process of experimentation, but yeah, ended up with something that it's a very faithful adaptation to the book, you know.
Yeah, yeah. So talk about Robert Harris. Did you communicate with him at all during the process, or like what was that like?
It was good. It was a good relationship. So I met him right at the beginning. We went for the producers and I went for lunch with him, and he was great. I mean, I have to say, generally, with the really good writers I've worked with, you know, like Le Carre or Hilary Mantel or Robert Harris, it's notable that they are also the most relaxed about the adaptation and the least precious and the least offensive. Um, and that's because I think that's because they understand that their book is separate and is safe, and you know it's not going to be affected really by what you do with the film. There's that. They're also, I think, just more sort of comfortable and confident with the work, so they're open to new ideas and you know variations. Um, and he was like that. It was the perfect you know situation that you want as the adapter, which is him saying, "I am here for you if you need me. If you want to
Yeah.
go off and do this on your own, that's you have my blessing." You know. And it was a little bit of both. I mean, I think I probably went off and did the first draft without really getting in touch with him. But then throughout the process after that, especially as we made some changes and added new things, there was a little bit of, you know, I would check with Robert really if because I mean, you know, you're there because you love the book. That's why
Yeah.
you're doing it, and you respect the book. So I would always hate it if I felt like that relationship had become you know, difficult or if they felt disrespected in any way. So I always try and stay in contact with the novelists if I'm making changes and you know just check their response to it. It doesn't mean that they would have to, you know, I have to have their blessing to make it. In the end, my loyalty lies to the film. But
Right, right.
I tell you what it feels like with adapting. It feels like a process of starting with loyalty to the book and gradually tiptoeing away to loyalty to the film. So
Yeah.
my first drafts are often much closer to the book, whichever book that is, you know, and then you
Hmm.
go through a sort of gradual process of disengaging, which you have to do because you've
Hmm.
got to make it work as a film, you know, whether that requires changes or not.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I'm gonna do like a little pivot here,
Okay.
and just ask because we always like to ask this. But what are some of your like favorite films and scripts? And are there any like movies, plays, other novels, perhaps, that you took inspiration from when you were writing Conclave?
For Conclave, I mean, I think Edward, the director, and I both felt there were interesting, there was kind of interesting points of inspiration from American 70s political thrillers.
Mm.
There's, you know, there's some fantastic films from that period, like All the President's Men. I love William Goldman, so there was
Hmm.
that. But I mean, it was such a specific world that there weren't that many. It's not a big genre, you know, kind of people thrillers. There weren't that many of them, so there wasn't a lot I could turn to really. Um,
No other Pope
I,
movies. Yeah.
not loads of they're awesome. But I mean, I do as a screenwriter, the bit of advice I would always give writers who are starting out is to read screenplays
Yeah.
more so even than watch films because you see it stripped of everyone else's work. You see what it is that we do.
Mhm.
So, and there are some writers whose work I just love reading almost as much as seeing the actual film. You know,
Mhm.
the Coen brothers, for example, I think write beautiful, elegant scripts like just
Definitely.
authors of concision, you know. So there are others as well. Yeah, so I heartily recommend that. I mean,
Yeah.
I find myself as a funny thing. I'm very porous to other people's work. So if I see like a bad film or read a bad script, I kind of think, yeah, that's me. That's all I can.
Yeah.
And if I see something great, I kind of feel really inspired and energized by it. And so I try and Try and watch the
You're
good things.
definitely not alone in that. I think that's
Is
something
that
that
right? Do we
happens to
think
all
we
of
all?
us.
Because
Yeah.
sometimes I'll meet writers and
Yeah.
I think they almost kind of
Yeah.
draw energy from seeing a bad one because it's like, well, I'm better than that. Whereas I feel really like sucked into the gravitational pull of mediocrity, you know. So it works the other way. We're seeing something great, you go, that's what I want to do. That, you know, process of emulation. Like when I was
Yeah.
young, I was in bands, you know, musical bands,
Yeah.
and I think that the impulse for that was to hear a song and think, oh, that's great. How do you do that? And then work it out in the bedroom exactly, you know, how you could do that yourself. And I think that impulse is still basically there. So when I see like a great film or a great scene, even, you know, you kind of think, oh, how did they do that? And then you have a go at trying to do a version of that yourself, you know. I think that's still there really, as an impulse for me.
For sure. Um, so one last kind of like context question here before we dive into the script. I think I think everyone here will find this helpful. In the library, we get asked for like sources and information on doing adaptations a lot. You know, aside from actually doing the work over time, is there anything that you did at the beginning of your career to kind of teach yourself that process? Any sources you consulted? Or what I'm really asking is like, what advice would you give to somebody who's embarking on trying to adapt something for the first time?
Yeah, it's a really hard question to answer. I wish I had. And I wish someone had for me sort of useful advice on how do you do adaptation. And I think I probably did look at some books. I don't think there were any that were super helpful, really.
Hmm.
And one of the interesting things I think is that I feel quite inarticulate sometimes talking about my process or how I've written a script. And I think that's because it's largely operating at an instinctive level now. And I can't quite tell if that's just because I've been doing it for so long that, you know, it's just become sort of internalized, or if maybe people who are going to be good at adapting have that instinct somehow inherent, you know. So
Yeah.
it's not necessarily a process that they've been taught. It's like they kind of got it from the get-go. They when they read the book. I mean, what happens, I think, is you read the book and you start to see the film running in your head.
Hmm. Hmm.
That's what it feels like, you know, and you work out, well, that way that the book started, that's not the start of the film that's running in my head. It's chapter three, that beat in chapter three, that's the start of the movie, you know, and you have to have those kind of instincts, I guess.
Gotcha.
Um, Again, the most useful thing I would say is read good adaptations, you know, look at the book and then look at the script and see what they did and try and work out why they did it. Because again, the writer themselves might not even really be able to articulate it. Uh,
Yeah, yeah.
but yeah,
So
just
everybody here should read Conclave the novel, then come back and watch this script breakdown, and you can see how it's done.
or better adaptations. There,
Yeah.
there are some really great adaptations out there, you
Yeah.
know, and it's interesting. Like sometimes I love the whole spectrum of it because there are very faithful adaptations that make great films. Like, you know,
Mhm.
well, in the same year, I remember there was No Country for Old Men, which is a
Mhm.
very faithful adaptation and is a superb movie, and there was There Will Be Blood, which is, you know, the almost the opposite end of where it sort of grew out of a book, but it's
Yeah,
different from the source material and sort of went in a different direction. And I love that full range of possibilities for adaptation. You know.
sure. Yeah, yeah. Um, okay, so I think if everybody's ready, Dustin, are you ready? We can we can dive into the script here.
I feel
And
weirdly nervous,
yeah.
and I think I think it's what
I
I
mean,
said.
a
I'm sort of
lot of
thinking I don't really know why I made a lot of the choices I did, but let's see if I can work it out.
I've had writers say before that it's like, oh, this is like going through my English paper with my teacher. Yeah.
That's what it feels like. Yeah.
Yeah.
Come to the front of the class.
Yeah. So well, you know, we'll just linger here for a second, the title
Okay.
page.
I'm good
Yay.
with that. That's all okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I guess we'll just, you know, start at the best place to start, which would be on page 1. Um, can you talk about your approach to the first page, but specifically this cracking window, which is like a motif that we see again and again, at least in the script.
Yeah. So this was not in the first draft. This was quite a late sort of addition, this little moment. Originally in the first draft, it started just with the image, which the film actually starts with now, which is the main character, Lawrence, sort of toiling up a hill. and his heavy breathing as he's rushing to get to the Casa San Marta because
Mhm.
he's been told that the Pope is dying. One of the things I got quite interested in, so my background is I was brought up Catholic, came from quite a devout Catholic family, but I'm no longer, a believer. But I think it's one of the things that drew me to the book. It was interesting to me to put my head back into the head of a believer.
Mhm.
And one of the things that was felt interesting was that I liked the idea that Conclave could, on one level, was a secular political thriller, but there was another level in which, for the characters like Lawrence, the world is shot through with this spiritual dimension. And Lawrence is someone who is struggling with his faith, who feels that he calls to the Lord and doesn't receive an answer. So we like playing with this little idea that there are these little moments throughout the film, and are they signs? Could these be signs of a higher power? And so the first one, but we always wanted them not to be sort of, clearly, obviously supernatural in any way. They had to just be things that there was a perfectly natural explanation for. But if you were seeing them through Lawrence's eyes, you're trying to decode the world and see if the Holy Spirit is talking to you. And one of them was this opening scene, which was just that Lawrence is asleep with his back to us in his room, and there's a window, and a pane of glass just pings and cracks as if with the cold or any other reason why a pane of glass might suddenly crack, and it wakes him up. And at that moment, then the phone rings to say the Pope is dying. And I guess as well, almost in a kind of pun sort of way, there was an element of the glass ceiling being broken, given where we're finally going to be going. In this story. So yeah, so that was what that was. In the end, we did have cuts where this was the opening. In the end, I think we all agreed that it was better actually just to come in with this driving sort of opening of him running up, hurrying up the hill.
Yeah, that makes sense. Wow. Okay, let's go on to page 2. In the first paragraph, we actually get our first glimpse of our protagonist, Cardinal Lawrence, as a careworn, anonymous, an administrator. Can you talk about your approach to character descriptions? But I think what's interesting about this script is you have the job of kind of keeping all of these cardinals distinct from each other on the page. And if you could kind of talk about how you managed that.
Yeah. I mean, first of all, in terms of character description, I mean, I like a little bit of description in the script. Sometimes when you see a script that's really stripped down just to the dialogue and the barest actions, I kind of feel, I think it's one of the reasons why I love the Coen Brothers scripts, because they're kind of beautifully written, and you really see the film starting to roll when you're reading their descriptions of, actions or people. So I like a little bit of it. I mean, I don't think I would, I have seen scripts where you have whole paragraphs that are describing the character, and if that works for the writer, great. But it's not the way I would do it. So I guess I would sort of tend towards as economical as possible, but giving some of the color or flavor that you're trying to get across, either the character or of the action. In terms of the different cardinals, I mean, it was helped that they all felt quite distinctive. They come from different nationalities. Adam is, from an African country. I don't think it's ever specified which one actually. Tremblay is Canadian, Tedesco is Italian, Lawrence is English in the final version. So there was that, and then there were very distinctive personality types as well. The other thing I found really interesting, and I think it's one of the things that drew me to the book and the character, is that they're all quite big, larger than life characters, and Lawrence is this sort of black and white little figure in the background, but
Yeah.
who's actually going to be our main character. And I always love that trick. So that's George Smiley as well in Tinker Tailor Soldier Spy. It's the kind of the person that no one else is noticing, but we the audience start to notice them. I always love that moment.
I love that too. So if we can kind of scroll elegantly, Dustin, to page 3. I'm kidding. There's where the cardinals are kind of, kneeled, praying over the Pope's body, and Lawrence notices the heartbreaking detail. I
Yeah.
think it might be, I think it's underlined. It's, there we go.
Yeah.
Um, the cracked panel in the headboard. I don't, correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't think this detail made it into the film. Can you talk about including that here in the script?
It was in a cut. I can't remember if I made it to the final cut. In the book, um, it isn't. In the book, he's because we're going to find some important documents later on when he searches the Pope's room later in the film. And in the book, I think it was a wooden post, and you twisted the top, and a secret compartment opened, and it just felt a little too Scooby-Doo for me. Um, with respect to Robert, I think it was fine in the book, but as a visual, it just suddenly started to feel a little bit creaky. So I wanted to kind of make that a bit less secret compartmenty. And also the Pope in the book, who's the dead Pope in the book, is known to have sort of rejected worldly splendor and magnificence. He lives in this very humble. He lives in the Casa San Marta, which is not normally where the Pope would live. I think. So I like the idea that he has like a sort of, we like the idea that he had like a padded, headboard, and he's just pulled a bit of it out and he's hidden the documents in there, but it's left a crack that's visible. So there were various things the way I liked put a little visual image in that the audience don't even notice maybe, or they'll barely notice, but we're going to come back to it and it'll have significance later on.
Gotcha. On to page 4. I love the description of Cardinal Cardinal Tremblay with his hair immaculately coiffed.
Yeah.
That's like, I like immediately you're like, oh yeah, like John Lithgow, like that's
Yeah.
But this whole thing about struggling to get the ring off, and it's a great line. Forgive me because my Latin is terrible, but sede vacante, the throne of the Holy Seat is vacant. It all just feels, when you're reading it and when you're watching it, it just feels very dire. And
Yeah. I guess because it's a ritual that we're sort of opening with, it felt like there
Mhm.
were various. I was always sort of thinking, when do the credits start? When the title start? And that I think originally that there was that point, um, and then I moved it a bit later because when they seal off the room after
Mhm.
the body's been removed, that sort of felt like, okay, this is the start of the film actually, because it's the start of the sealing off from the world process that the conclave is going to be about.
Mhm.
Um,
Mhm.
but also there were wherever we could, it felt really central to conclave that the grandeur and the scale and the spectacle of the Vatican should be contrasted with ordinary, absurd, frail, old men who are struggling to get up from the kneeling position, or or struggling to cut the ring from the Pope's finger, to pull the ring from the finger. Wherever we could do that, we did it, because it was sort of, well, this is what it's about. It's about how, as one of the cardinals says later on, we try to be ideal. We can't, well, we follow an ideal. We can't always be ideal.
Mhm. Mhm.
So it's our flawed, shitty version of something, of the thing we want to be.
Right. So over the next couple of pages, the cardinals kind of recount how the Holy Father spent his last day and how they're going to communicate this with the public. And so I'm jumping to page 9. And I just this joke, you sort of touched on it, just now, but the joke about, it's trending on the internet and everybody's kind of clueless.
Yeah.
um can you just talk about just places where you like inject a bit of humor into because I'm one of those people, I don't think movie, like even a drama can be like funny enough,
But one of the things that happened, we didn't really know it until we started screening in front of audiences, was because it feels like it's such a sacred space you're in. Once you give the audience permission to laugh, they kind of they really went for it, So we got a lot more kind of laughter than we thought we would get from the film, because it's like you've given them permission to kind of laugh at the pomposity of it all. So I mean, I remember reading the book, and there was a line where Tremblay said it's trending, and I think that was maybe all it says in the book, or it's trend, something like that anyway. And I remember thinking, oh, that's interesting, because again, it was just had the seed of that whole tension between the modern world, the secular world, and the sacred world. So, and then I made more of a gag of it by having the others be clueless about what he means when he says it's trending, just because it felt like a character note for Tremblay, that he's much more plugged in to the modern world than the others are.
Yes, yes.
And indeed to the world of image and presentation. You know, I mean, that is Tremblay.
Definitely. That now that you bring that up, that really like makes sense. So on page 10, um, first at the top, we have Adeyemi's line, well, Dean, you know, the responsibility for the conclave falls upon you. We have the painstaking detail, which you mentioned about sealing off. Is it papal or papal?
Papal.
Papal, okay.
Not from
The
a Catholic background, did Lauren?
the papal suite, which it's really I love the painstaking detail that goes into sealing it off because it's you kind of know like, oh, this is might be broken into later. Uh, so I wonder, you know, the details of this. How do you figure out if, you know, if you're being accurate with that?
I mean, we did do some research ourselves, but also Robert had done a lot of research, especially on the rituals, the mechanisms of the actual conclave voting itself, and the sealing of, because it's a bit like the king is dead, long live the king. You know, once a pope is dead, there's a sort of ritual of freezing the process until the election of the next pope, and all of that felt really interesting to me and intriguing. The whole ritualization, and one of the things that was really easy about Conclave in terms of drama was that it's about a form of ritualized drama in the sense that it's about a form of ritualized conflict. You know, it's an election. I mean, and you know, all the stuff that you would normally be looking for in a story or trying to draw out, which is essentially conflict between characters, either within the character or between characters. It's it's so easy with Conclave because it's, well, here are the 5 candidates. They're all in conflict with each other to see, you know, who's going to be Pope. So it all played on the surface in a way that felt like a sort of a concentrated form of dramatic conflict, you know.
Yeah. Um, so spilling onto this is good because this is kind of a related question, but if we spill onto page 11, we get lots of different Vatican, Casa Santa Marta locations. In the book, which Javier has my copy of it. I think he texted me last night to be like, I rescued it from the fire.
Save the book, for God's sake, save the book.
Yeah. Um, so can you the book I know has like a map of the Vatican and all of that. Can you talk about mentally sort of mapping where the scenes would take place? And when you know when you were writing, kind of like figuring that out.
Yeah, I mean, it was, again, that felt an interesting, a lot of Conclave felt interesting because it was restrictive. Like, there were only going to be so many main part characters. You were going to have only so many locations, because it's a bit like you know, like those old sort of whodunit murder mysteries where you're in a kind of big house and the roads
Yeah.
have been flooded, so you're stuck for the night, and you know, it's like an Agatha Christie almost. It had
Yeah.
that kind of those kind of parameters to it, that we're all locked in together. So there were only so many locations that were available, essentially,
Mhm.
in terms of the logic of the Vatican. You know, so we knew it'd be Casa San Marta. The election does take place in the Sistine Chapel, and there were a few other and then there's some open spaces in the Vatican that we knew we could use. So so there was that. There was going through just those, but then as we moved into production and did location scouting with what we could get and what we could, obviously we couldn't shoot in the Vatican. You're not allowed to shoot in the Vatican. So
Right.
we knew some things we were going to do as a build, as a studio build, and other things we were going to find around Rome. We shot in Rome. So we would just occasionally, you know, they'd come back from the sort of scout and say, there's this hospital, there's this courtyard in this hospital. And you'd think, okay, that's great. Where can we use that? You know? And that gave sort of opportunities. So the locations changed a lot throughout the process, especially towards the end as we went into prep, and became. So there were a few there was a few scenes that was set in the chapel in the Casa San Marta, and in the end we changed those to like we found a place outside Rome that Mussolini had built. I think it's the EUR, which was like a big sort of bureaucratic complex, I guess. It's just outside Rome. And it's this big fascist sort of architecture, you know, everything's huge and white marble. And there were some really interesting locations there. And one of them was like a cinema, basically, with these rows of blue seating. And that there was a scene that was originally taking place, I think in a chapel, and we moved it to there instead. And that felt that was it just, you know, where you think that's a more interesting location, it's a less obvious location.
Well, it was so striking when you watch it in the movie. You're like, wow, this is
It's a great shot, isn't it? Those blue seats.
yeah,
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 yeah, look good. There were a
yeah,
few, and there were a few things like that. So there was, you know, there were a few scenes which in the book take place just within the rooms, and and with him, you know, especially from Edward, the director, we were looking for ways of finding more interesting sort of context to put them in. So the scene where they're on the landing of the staircase, where the three of them are discussing who they should vote for, that was originally in a room, but it just felt again sort of slightly more threaded through with paranoia to have it in this, you know, it's like they've had to go to this quiet little location so no one can overhear them. So
yeah. That's cool. And I think I read somewhere that like you were in touch with like a cardinal who kind of like helped you with like, did I read that correctly?
yeah, there was a sort of religious advisor in the early stages. I mean, Robert had already, as I said, Robert Harris had done lots of research and he'd had access to the diary of a cardinal who'd been through a conclave. So I think that was a major resource for him. And then we
Mhm.
had a religious advisor during production on set who
Gotcha.
think was I can't remember what he was a Monsignor. He was a canon or something. Can't remember what rank he was in the church, but he was on set the whole time because, especially for the actors, there was I think they found it really useful to say, you know, how which hand do I, you know, because they're not all
Yeah,
Catholic,
absolutely.
all the
Yeah,
small details, you know, the way Catholic actors love and can build a character from small physical details. So that was really useful for them.
that's so cool. Um, so on to page 12. Where there this is I mean this is like a totally random place to bring this up. There's a much better page where someone they're talking about, you know, Lawrence's potential to be pope, and someone says, oh, you know, don't worry, there hasn't been an English pope in 1,000 years or something like that. um but I noticed, you know, in the book, the dean is an Italian guy,
Yeah, many.
Lomelli. Can you talk about the decision to make Lawrence English and kind of where that came from?
Yeah, I mean, there were two things really that there was in the book. The main character is Lamelli. His closest sort of friend is Bellini.
Mhm.
Um, the sort of the villain of the piece is Tedesco. So they were all Italian, and we were going to have that problem of are we going to have half the film subtitled in, because they would naturally be speaking Italian to each other, and and that wasn't necessarily impossible. I mean, we considered it, um, but then it also felt possible because there were so many different nationalities within the conclave. You know, because obviously the cardinals are coming from all over the world. There was a kind of argument for saying, could we say English is the sort of you know, lingua franca that they're all using? Because I think in reality, probably Italian would be
For
the
sure.
franca, but we sort of thought we could get away with being Italian because um, Tremblay is Canadian, and then of course once we cast Stanley, we were never going to have Stanley or Rafe pretending to be Italian and doing, you know, cod Italian accents. So it became a much more anglophone kind of cast, I guess. But so that's why they were speaking English rather than Italian a lot of the time. But in terms of the character actually being English, that came because we cast Rafe.
Got it.
Just though, I mean, obviously there are English cardinals. There aren't very many, to be fair, but there have been some. But it just made sense that rather than trying to fight against his nationality, there was no reason to do that. Made more sense.
Absolutely. Yeah. Okay, so we're gonna do bear with us, everyone. We're gonna do a 10-page jump now to page 22. So over those 10 pages we skipped, we learned Lawrence wants to retire as dean, but the Pope wouldn't let him, and he's having a crisis of faith. And that Lawrence and Bellini are friends. And Bellini's kind of a favorite amongst the liberals, you know, to be Pope. And he doesn't really feel worthy, but he wants to keep Tedesco, the ultra conservative patriarch of Venice, from getting it. So he kind of keeps himself in the race. But what I want to talk about is on page 22, spilling onto 23, Lawrence goes to see Wozniak, who claims that the late Pope dismissed Cardinal Tremblay from his posts for gross misconduct, right before dying. So in the book, it says, it says that Wozniak smells of alcohol or something like that. But here in the script, you have you been drinking? And I wonder if you could kind of talk about just sort of thinking cinematically and turning that stuff into,
Yeah. I mean, especially with adaptations, there are a common challenge is to take things which were either thoughts or a narrator's voice, and think, okay, how can this work as dialogue? How am I going to get this across to an audience? And sometimes that can be a real challenge, and sometimes it's quite easy. It felt okay. I mean, so in the book, Lawrence does not say to Wozniak, "Have you been drinking?" But he's aware that he has been drinking, as you say, because he can smell the vodka on him. So
right.
I'm asking myself the question: would Lawrence say, "Have you been drinking?" And I felt
Mm,
because he's stressed, he's overstressed. It's the start of the conclave. Things are already going wrong. Wozniak is a much lower rank, and he's kind of irritated by having to see him at this point. He doesn't really know why Wozniak wants to see him. And Wozniak is clearly drunk. I sort of believed that he would slightly scold him for this. So I felt I could get away with it.
gotcha.
I
Yeah,
mean,
that.
just
Mm,
from a writing point of view, I think I always find this so interesting. I never think in terms of three acts, really. Um, but it's amazing how often you get to page 20, 21, 22, the classic end of act one page count, and you go, yep, there it is. There's the end of act one. Because it's
yep,
Wozniak saying Tremblay was dismissed that really is the start of the story. Um,
absolutely.
it's just amazing, isn't it? How it's just built into the DNA of storytelling that
Yep.
page.
You're like, oh, what page? Yep, it's
There it is, yeah.
right
And
where it should
in
be.
no way did I try to, manipulate it to being there. It just naturally falls into that place.
Yeah, that's cool. So let's move to page 26. Um, okay, so on page 26, we meet or they're starting to talk about this pivotal character of Benitez. So on page 27, yeah, give us a little elegant scroll there, Dustin. Um, onto page 27. Very good, very good. Um, so here we have, I think if you go just a little bit further down, Dustin, there we go. We're looking at a slim man dressed in a somewhat shabby, plain black attire, etc. So we meet him here sitting in this plastic chair in the kitchen. And in the book, he's Filipino
Yeah,
and the Archbishop of Baghdad.
yeah.
In your script, he's Mexican and the Archbishop of Kabul.
Mhm.
Can you talk about introducing him and kind of your approach to that here?
Um, I mean, I love the character of Benitez, and I love that moment when he arrives because, as the reader or for the audience, you sense that here's a mysterious character who's different from everybody else that we've met so far, and is going to have a huge impact on the story. Um, I used to read Dostoevsky when I was young, and there's the idiot with Prince Mishkin. That sense of the sort of holy fool from outside. And he's a
Mhm.
Christ-like figure, essentially. Benitez is a Christ-like figure who comes and redeems and renews the spiritual heart of the church. I think really is fundamentally what his role is supposed to be. Um, he's from the Philippines in the book, and it was just a casting question, really. We did go to the Philippines to. So I mean, I think it wasn't that important that he was from the Philippines. It was important that Benitez be from a Catholic country,
Yeah.
and we felt it was important that it wasn't from what you could loosely call a sort of first world country. Um, so we cast quite a wide net, and there were other
Mhm.
sort of parameters we were looking for. And Carlos just gave us what we felt we needed, which was this gentle, quiet, quite intense presence that I sort of thought, yeah, with that, Benitez doesn't have to say a lot and you're going to notice him.
Yeah.
He draws,
Yeah.
he draws the eye, and he has that beautiful sort of saintly face. Um,
Right.
so, so yeah, so there was that. And then The book had, I guess by the time we were getting the production, the Iraq War felt quite a long time ago. So we slightly, I mean, it wasn't a huge difference, but we slightly pulled it forward to Afghanistan rather than Iraq, so Kabul.
Gotcha. Gotcha. Um, so this is kind of related. If we scroll on to we got page 32 here. And it seems like Benitez is a little more like self-assured around all these cardinals than and less kind of like nervous than he is like in the book. Was that something you were kind of like conscious of when
I
approaching
think
the character?
I think so, yeah. I mean, I sort of felt like a little bit like the man who fell to earth, kind of
Mhm.
otherworldliness about Benitez, which I liked, that he's really not from this kind of power center of the Catholic Church. He's from, places where he's been dealing with the poor and with the people that have, the victims of wars. And so he doesn't really know or really care about the power center. So he's not, I think probably he's a little more nervous in the book. And I liked him being quiet and calm because he starts to stand for something very different for Lawrence. He becomes a touchstone of true spirituality for Lawrence, who's used to dealing with, the Tremblays of the world.
Right.
So he had to be the opposite of Tremblay, basically. Yeah.
So kind of talking about these, the character dynamics, it's probably like a good time to ask, like who's your favorite character to write, and also who was the most difficult?
Um, I mean, there were different things I enjoyed about different characters. I mean, Lawrence Lamelli in the book was the reason I wanted to do it because he was like a George Smiley character, and like as I said earlier, I love those characters. Defeated, bruised, bit beaten down, but not quite out yet.
Right, right.
And I love that. I love that journey, and I love that character. So he was obviously the main draw for me. But there were things about I like the kind of Prince Michigan element to Benitez. I really was attracted to that. And then Tedesco, who's the arch conservative, was kind of fun because he's such a big, colorful character. He's a kind of fun villain.
Right.
And then Sergio, who played him, was just so much. He was just so great. He's a great comic
Yeah.
actor, and he really brought him to life. So he could do little things, add little things in with Sergio. The trickiest one probably was John's character. Certainly on the page, before John came and made it seem utterly effortless.
Right.
Because I think he's North American and he's kind of glossy and he's got his hair pomaded and he's much more image conscious. It could fall into cartoon if I wasn't careful, you know.
Yeah.
But then and also because he is the villain and he's kind of quite early on potentially flagged as the villain, you needed someone who could be charming and just slightly resist to that, that telegraphing. So again, you get an actor like John Lithgow who's just got this sort of lovely warmth to him, and it really helped disguise some of that, and stop it being too much the kind of glossy newscaster villain cardinal.
Right, right. Um, so we'll move to page 35. Amidst all the cardinals being super clicky like mean girls in the cafeteria.
I love that someone said that it's Mean Girls in the
Mean girl.
cafeteria. I
Yeah.
love that quote.
So you have appeared Tedesco quoting Yeats,
Yeah.
saying, things fall apart, the center cannot hold. Can you talk about like adding those kind of little like flourishes?
Yeah, I don't know how convincing it is that Tedesco quotes Yeats, to be honest. Um, in the book, because Lawrence's character is Lamelli, this is an Italian talking to another Italian and saying, "We need an Italian Pope. We haven't had one for a while," and it became it's a sort of nationalistic argument for Tedesco. Obviously, once he's no longer talking to an Italian, he's talking to an Englishman. And I think anyway, I found it more interesting that it was about an authoritarian, sort of centralist, conservative view versus liberal view. So it was, you need Rome, the mother church, you need the authority, you need Latin to be the universal language again, because all of these different countries with their own ways, it's getting too pluralistic, it's getting too liberal, and it's all going to fall apart. The center will not hold. So it kind of, I just thought of the poem because of the line and that sense of, an impending doom because it's all getting too fractured. It's from Tedesco's point of view.
Yeah, absolutely. So we'll kind of jump now, a little bit of a jump, to page 42. I want to talk about page 42, 43, and 44. So Dustin, elegant scrolling here. um, I wanted, this is, obviously this was the thing that got you interested in adapting Conclave. So I want to talk about, let's see, wait, no. Okay, I just want to note here that Lawrence confronts Cardinal Tremblay about his allegedly being fired, and Tremblay's like, no, that didn't happen, and Wozniak's drinking has become a problem, and stop being nosy. But on 42, we've got it's the first day of conclave. Lawrence gives us this homily, give us a pope who doubts. Talk about writing this. I mean, we know it was the thing that drew you into doing this project, but what's kind of like going through your head as you're putting this to paper?
I love the scene in the book, and I like it in the film. I think I probably always like those scenes where there's a kind of public scandal, it's some kind of formal event where someone does something unexpected or stands up and says something unexpected. I always find that inherently dramatic, really, and interesting. It's the first time Lawrence does something that no one's expecting of him. He's such an ordinary, managerial bureaucrat in the background. No one's expecting him to be interesting. And almost out of nowhere, this is not the speech he prepared. It comes to him on the spot. He says this quite radical thing, which is certainty is the enemy, and let us doubt. So the job really, and this is always a job with adaptation, is maybe not always, but very rarely does the dialogue from the book that works in the book, is that going to work on the screen. So you start to, and usually it's because there's more than you need on the screen,
Right.
So it's a process of boiling down, cutting, combining. So to be honest, I can't really remember how close this is to the speech in the book. I'm sure it's fairly close, but it's probably a boiled down version of it. You're always looking for a good end point in a way that a book doesn't have to worry about it. You're thinking, what's the end of the scene? So often that would be the area where I would diverge from the book, is thinking, what's the last line going to be, or what's the reaction to the last line going to be? But yeah, basically, this was why I wanted to make the film, because I loved this speech. I thought it was a great speech that Robert came up with, and a great idea.
Yeah, I having just read the book in with the script, it is like pretty close to what's in the book. It just seems like you kind of like just kind of cut certain paragraphs and just cut it down, and just made it,
Yeah.
um
And that's always the way. It's like the scene with Wozniak. I think Wozniak is like about 4 pages. It's probably around about 40, 50 lines of dialogue in the book, and you just never need that in a film. You're always thinking, well, we can do this in 10 lines, and you usually can, especially with great actors, That's always the process, I think. It's always boil down, boil down.
Yeah, for sure. So let's go to page 47, and we haven't even addressed this yet, but we haven't talked about the nuns. But Lawrence here is forced to borrow, I think it's up at the top, Dustin, Sister Agnes's key card, which establishes kind of a connection with her. But the question, of course, that I noted here is down the page, there's an organ playing, a choir singing, Veni Creator Spiritus, which is a music cue.
Yeah.
And do you write to music or think about music when you're writing a script like this?
I do. I always write to music, always. I always write with headphones on, listening to music. There's a few things. I always have that, and I think that's from the early days when I was sort of living and writing in bed sits. With my wife, she was my girlfriend at the time, and she'd be writing a script and I was writing a script, and there's a kind of way of firewalling off from each other, that I would put headphones on and listen to music. So I always do that. I didn't really do it very much for Conclave at all, actually. but sometimes I will, if I have very strong ideas on actual music cues, I would put them in the script. Always with the understanding that really it's going to be the director's call in the end, but why not suggest stuff if you have ideas? So I do sometimes do that. The other thing that's interesting is that I have found that I often have a piece of music, a single piece of music that I start to associate with the project, and that if I'm stuck, I'll go and listen to that piece of music. It becomes a kind of weird touchstone. And the funny thing is, they very rarely make any sense in relation to the project, So like I remember with Wolf Hall, there was a piece of like a kind of a Latin instrumental piece. Like he couldn't have got further from the world of the Tudor court. But there was something about that music that made me think, no, that's emotionally the heart of Wolf Hall. And I would keep listening to it while I was writing scenes, Can't actually remember if I had one with Conclave, to be honest. So no punchline to that.
Yeah.
But yeah, so music is really important to me at
Yeah.
various stages of the process.
I love that. So let's go to page 53. So they conclude the first ballot with no candidate achieving a huge majority. So on 53, Monsignor O'Malley explains what he's found out about Cardinal Benitez to Lawrence. Like this is another I just want to point this out for people. Like, in the book, O'Malley, just kind of hands him a report and that's that. But here he really explains it. And can you talk about writing that?
It's the same problem we were talking about earlier, really, which is, turning things that weren't dialogue into dialogue and making sure that's not going to stand out as really clumsy exposition. Because
Mhm.
it is exposition, and it's you have to disguise that. And that's a rhythmic thing about making it feel like, okay, does this feel like someone reading out, the highlights of a report? Does it rhythmically feel, is it going to be okay for the actor to deliver, or is it clunky, or so drawing attention to itself too much? So I mean, this is real sort of nuts and bolts screenwriting stuff, how making sure that the dialogue is, if it is exposition, that you're disguising that, particularly in naturalistic films, like this. So, and that's just a rhythmic thing, like the listing of it, going for shorter sentences generally,
Right.
not being afraid to break up the kind of the diction, in the way that we do in real life, all of that stuff.
Gotcha. Okay, so let's go to page 58. I want to talk about 58 and 59. So Lawrence starts accruing some votes and gets accused of splitting the liberal vote. Also, he and O'Malley cannot find any sort of report confirming that Tremblay's been let go. But what I really want to talk about on this page is the turtles. These weren't in the book,
No.
correct? Yeah, can you talk about inventing those and having Lawrence and Benitez kind of bond over them here?
Yeah, so it was again, when I was talking at the beginning of the film about the glass pane, the cracks, we were
Hmm.
looking for another little thing that we could set up here that we would come back to at the end of the film, which Lawrence looks at and thinks, is this a little message I'm receiving? And we found out that one of the popes had been gifted some turtles from Venezuela, I think, and they were in a pond in the Vatican grounds. And when Benitez was still Filipino, I looked up what the significance of turtles is in various Filipino myths, and it was quite useful. It was kind of symbols of wisdom, messengers from the other side. So I thought, this is great, this is perfect. Let's set up the turtles, and then we'll use it at the end of the film as if it's possibly in Lamelli's eyes a message from God to say this is the right path you're on.
Yeah.
And then, of course, he stopped being Filipino, but still somehow there was something about the turtle that worked for me as an image. I guess
Yeah.
because it's an animal that lives in two realms, the world of water and the world of land. And that felt a little bit connected with what we were saying about Benitez being someone who falls between two sort of binary opposites.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
yeah. And I think often with symbolic images, it's like there maybe isn't a logical or intellectual reason. You just you just get a good feeling that it might work or that it'll look right, So it's one of those.
Gotcha. That's so cool. Okay. So let's go down to another little bit of a jump here to page 66. On this, I guess this is the second day of conclave. Lawrence feels his pen vibrate. I think it's even underlined. Yeah.
Yeah.
Um, and the room shakes. And then on 67, there's been an attack. And I feel like when I was reading the book doesn't really include there's no like warning about the attacks. Can you talk about kind of setting these up?
Yeah. To be honest, I'd forgotten and thought it was in the book that there was an earlier attack. And when I went by the book, I thought, oh no, we made that up. Um, I feel like a lot that was, was going to be in the film was given to us by the book, but the process of the adaptation was about setting up careful balances of things. The balance between the sort of spiritual drama, the character-driven drama, and thriller elements, and making sure that architecturally we were never sinking too much into one or the other. So I think I probably reached this point. Sorry, what page are we on here?
We are on I believe it is 67.
Around about the halfway mark, I guess.
Yeah.
So I think I probably just felt we need something here that's going to inject some of that sort of thriller tension into it. The increased knowledge that there are terrible things going on in the outside world, and it's one more thing that Lawrence is having to deal with and starting to crumble under the pressure of. Because it's a conclave, so they're sequestered. So the cardinals are not supposed to know about what's going on in the outside world. I mean, I think this is one of the fundamental things for Lawrence's character, that he is there to organize the conclave and to make sure the conclave runs smoothly. And there are lots of rules about what can and can't happen in the conclave that he's supposed to be protecting. He ends up being the person who essentially dismantles this conclave. And I think that's a really interesting character journey to go on. It's like he's supposed to be the guardian of the system. He ends up being this sort of reluctant revolutionary who destroys the system in the name of this, redeeming return to a kind of spiritual truth. Sorry, that was a long way of answering. Basically, I think
No, but also when I was reading it too, I sort of like drew it back to like the crack in the window at the beginning, and there's cracks and there's like things that are, kind of
absolutely. No, I think that's absolutely right. I think that's absolutely right. And I think as well, there was something really lovely about, well, you're in a sealed tank in conclave. So what is going on outside? So anytime you could do it with a little bit of sound, it's like people are listening a lot in conclave, It's a recurring trope, listening to see if they can hear something all the way through the film. And this was one of those. It's just like the faint tremor, that's coming from the outside world. Felt nice. I have to say that I'm absurdly thinking of Jurassic Park and the trembling water.
Yeah,
Same kind of thing, like something really big on the way.
Okay, so we'll do like another little jump to a major point here in the movie where Cardinal Adeyemi starts to gain votes and traction, and it looks like he's the front runner suddenly. But then there's this incident with Sister Shinumi being brought to Rome, and he has a child and an illicit past with her. Can you talk about writing this and just kind of converting it over from the book? Dustin, again, a nice, elegant scroll.
Again, I can't remember how different this is from the book. Can you remember how actually probably?
Yeah, here he asks for when he says that he'll hear Sister Shinumi's confession. In the book, she actually goes into this whole
I see. Sorry, yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, a little bit like later on in the film when Lawrence finds the documents in the Pope's, you're kind of looking at what's the most gripping kind of place to cut here. You've got some information you're going to get over to the audience. Do you do it straight away, or do you withhold it for a little while to whet their appetite? And then, especially if if there's a place later on where you can believably be saying this to another character, which is essentially what we have to have him do. So I think often the instinct is to have deferred gratification, as it were. He knows something, we don't know what it is he knows yet. We've got to wait till the next scene to find out what it is he's discovered. So it's probably that kind of instinct. Yeah. The other thing that felt very much like the core duty, really, of one of the duties of the adaptation was there's a repetition in the narrative of Conclave. That there are three candidates, and one by one they're going to be, found to be flawed and dismissed. And it was the way of making that feel elegant and satisfying and not too repetitive. So breaking it up, giving each one a slightly different color, making sure that there are other things happening which are disguising that repetition, you know. It's a real architectural kind of question.
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
That makes
yeah.
sense.
Yeah. Um, so I guess we can now kind of glide onto onto page 79. This is just another area where I just want to draw attention to this, where O'Malley tells Lawrence that Benitez was supposed to go to Geneva for medical treatment, but he never went, so it couldn't have been that serious. It's very shrewdly kind of like setting up a little bit of a mystery there.
Yeah. Again, everything in Conclave was about trying to get the balance just right. Because if you tip it too much one way, it could become like a schlocky thriller. You tip it too much the other way, it could become a sort of wordy, rather dry drama. And it was like trying to make this about something and entertaining. And on like so that's on the macro. And on the micro, it was always like if we say too much about Benitez, is it like a telegraphing for the audience too much? You kind of want to plant the seeds so that when you find out the truth about Benitez, you go, yeah, it was all there for me, or some of it was there for me to work it out. And I agonized over how much do we give the audience before it starts to look too on the nose, you know.
Mhm, mhm.
And I think my instinct was always I'd rather give the audience too little than to be like really, running a flag up about it.
Yeah. I'm just noticing like a couple of the chat is kind of coming alive with some questions just about, and I think it's important for us to kind of address these. There's just a question about why in the script you haven't included things like angle on or cut to or that kind of stuff. I mean that's yeah.
I like all this stuff. I love all this stuff. Yeah. No, I do sometimes. I tend not to do the cut twos, to be honest, because if you put every cut two in, you've added 2 pages onto your script unnecessarily. If
Mhm.
it's like a smash cut or if there's a specific effect you're going for, then I would put that in. If it's, I mean, I tend to just minimally do shot descriptions because I think it's just annoying for a director, generally,
Mhm.
they don't need me telling them. So I mean, literally, I would if I know that I want the scene to be played out in wide, I would say wide, or usually the most I will do is say close on Lawrence or close on, whoever.
Gotcha.
That's it. I would never say like two shot or mid
Um,
shot. I do that.
There was a question about languages and subtitles that I'll get to because there's a good place where we can talk about that. But do you have a particular software that you write with
Final
when
draft.
gotcha. Yeah, I think most people do. All right. So let's go to page 81. Yeah, 81. Okay. So Bellini tries to tries to convince everybody to vote for Tremblay because he's the least worst option,
Yeah.
which feels very prescient.
Yeah.
When you write something like this, like when you're actually writing this, are you thinking about, current events, or are you just trying to think about the story at hand?
It was obviously in my mind that this was a way of discussing politics. And when I was writing the first draft, I think it was probably Trump's first term. I think he probably got elected. So that sense of, entering a different kind of world politically, I think was definitely hovered above this. But the thing about Conclave, I felt was that it was a way of talking about politics that both felt quite rooted in, the situation we find ourselves in now, but also felt quite universal because fundamentally it was about issues like the corrupting influence of power and the difference between those who have a genuine desire to serve versus those who are just ambitious and self-serving, and these are themes that are universal and timeless in terms of politics. So I thought what was great about Conclave, the book, was that it was a way of delivering both of those at the same time, both the universal and the particular.
For sure. Okay, so let's go to I think it's page 85, where Lawrence goes to Benitez and talks to him about voting for Tremblay. And I love this line at the top. If I may, sometimes I find instead of speaking, I have to become silent, and in the silence, wait for God to be heard. Talk about that.
Um, it felt uh, it felt very much just like something Benitez would would tell him.
Mm.
Lawrence is struggling with his faith, keeps, I think in a sense calling to God and not getting an answer. And it felt like Benitez in a way is, I can't remember his name, Jiminy Cricket? The Jiminy Cricket?
Yeah, Jimmy
Yeah.
Cricket. Yeah.
He's got that kind of role, I think, and it sort of annoys Lawrence in a way, but it's because he's the voice of his conscience, telling him what's the right thing to do every step of the way. So when Lawrence comes, because Lawrence, deep down his heart is sickened at the thought of them voting for Tedesco, who he knows is, not really deserving of the papacy. But he kind of thinks, well, they're right. What else are we going to do? Sorry, not Tedesco, Tremblay. We're right, because otherwise Tedesco's going to get in. We'll have to do tactical voting, essentially. But he feels sick deep inside about it. And Benitez just voices that back to him and says, I'm not doing that. Which he knows is right, but it's annoying because it's like being shown your own bad impulses.
Yeah. Yeah.
So Benitez always really stands for the right thing to do. And then again, I like this idea that so much of there's a kind of trope in Conclave of listening carefully to see if you can hear what am I supposed to do? What's the right thing to do?
Yeah.
And Benitez sort of says this quite clearly in one line.
So the other thing I want to note on this page is if you scroll down just a little bit, actually it's on page 86, yeah, a little bit. Keep going, keep going, keep going. Lawrence watches for a moment, he snuffs out the candle, he gets distracted by the little razor out of place in the bedroom because it's still in its cellophane wrapper.
Yeah.
I don't necessarily have like a question. We don't need to like talk about this at length, but it's just another like spot where it's just like,
I put this in, I took it out. I put it back in, I took it out. It was one of those things where I thought, is it too much? Is it again a little Scooby-Doo? Because obviously the inference by the end of the film is that he doesn't shave because he doesn't need to. Now, the other thing, I can't actually remember if this made it in the final cut. I've got a feeling we might have shot it, but then lost it. I'm sorry, I should remember that, but I'm afraid I don't. The other thing is that the condition that Benitez has, that we settled on in the end, doesn't necessarily make sense of this moment anyway.
right.
But it is from the book, and it was supposed to be one of those little breadcrumbs that suggests there's something different about Benitez.
Yeah, well, and I think that's just one of the like hallmarks of like a good script is there's just like these little things, you might not like it's you don't even really pay attention to it, but then at the end it all comes.
Yeah.
So let's move to page 88. And Lawrence, this is where Lawrence asks Sister Agnes how Sister Shinumi came to be in Rome, and she gives him the document that says Tremblay requested her to come to Rome. And what I want to linger on, Dustin, I know you've highlighted that, very good. Scroll down just a bit. Keep going, keep going, keep going. Keep going. Bottom of 89, I think. This ping-ponging kind of dialogue with, I deny that accusation, like you deny asking our superioress to transfer one of the sisters from Rome, like no, I asked her. Can you talk about your approach to this dialogue? Like,
I mean, I think if a screenwriter, what I started out as a theatre writer, as a playwright, so even more so there, but I still think one of the core skills for a screenwriter is you need to be able to handle dialogue, and you need to be able to handle dialogue in all of its forms and all its requirements. You need to really develop the ear for the rhythm of dialogue, because so much of the structure of the scene, and the energy and the emotion of the scene, and even the themes of the scene is in the rhythm. So it's that trick of, it's like that editors do where you should be able to turn the sound off, and probably just from performance without sound, and from the cuts, you should be able to get a sense of what's happening in the scene. Not sure if that's entirely true actually, but I'm going to stick with having said that anyway. I was just thinking in this scene, I think we do in that we do start to cut to single shots. We shot this scene in an archway, and that kind of in profile face to face, so it was even more the kind of tennis ping pong thing. So yeah, you have that. It's like, again, it's like music. It's like jazz or something. You start off slow, and that's longer speeches, and then they get shorter and shorter, and they're starting to bounce off each other very quickly, and then you're looking for the end point, you know. It's a musical rhythmic thing.
For sure. Yeah, I just think that that in particular like stood out to me as like a boxing
Well,
match.
they want because it's such a courteous world that they're in. It's such a false courteous world they're in. There aren't that many times when real emotions breaking through, and this is
Yes.
probably the first time, isn't it, where you feel actually the anger that they're feeling is actually breaking through.
Yes. So Dustin, if you want to just take us, I think I had flagged page 91, but I'm just gonna go to 92. Um, where okay, so first I'll just say that Lawrence has broken into the papal suite trying to find evidence that condemns Tremblay. And it's powerful because we established that that suite was locked up. And I mean, I think I'm probably not alone here. When Sister Agnes comes down and puts her hand on that door handle, that was and the strange moment of connection. I definitely don't remember that being in the book. So can you talk about kind of writing that?
I mean, there's a couple of impulses behind it. One was we wanted Sister Agnes to be a more significant character, or to give her more significant moments than there are in the book. We felt like, in a way, Conclave was starting to become about the silent chorus of the women who weren't allowed to be taking an active part in the church, who are supposed to just be moving around in the background, you know. And so he was becoming more and more central as an idea for us. So we liked the thriller aspect of he's transgressed massively by breaking into the papal. Ironically, that in trying to do the right thing, he's had to first of all do something which would be condemned as the wrong thing. So there's that moment. We wanted to. It was one of the places where we felt we could lean in slightly to the thriller aspect of, is he going to be caught? And there was something quite nice. Again, that kind of like All the President's Men, where it's like it's never someone pulling a gun out. It's just like, is there someone listening? Is there someone there? Or it's footsteps in a corridor. It's all those lovely ways you can build a sense of paranoia and tension. It felt like one of those moments. And then there is this sense, especially with what's going to come soon, as you said, of a connection starting, of an alliance starting to form between Sister Agnes and Lawrence. And this is that kind of moment there. It's as if somehow she senses who is in there and what he's doing. And I like that sort of reveal about Sister Agnes. She sort of starts off as a sort of nurse Ratched almost. You kind of think she is. It turns out she's actually going to be closer to the chief in One Flew the Cuckoo's Nest. She's both she and Lawrence have to recognize that they're both, in fact, loyal to the dead Pope, and recognize each other as being essentially, going to go on the same mission together.
Well, because I think the next scene that they have together, he's trying to make copies of that report, and she's like, "How many do you need?"
Yeah, exactly, yeah.
So they're like on the same team.
Yeah,
Yeah,
absolutely.
yeah.
And then gives her speech in the the scene after that, sort of devastating speech where she stops Tremblay in his tracks.
Yes, yes. So let's go down to page 93, where I think he's sitting on the bed, and it seems like he's about to give up. And then, whoop, there's the frayed part of the headboard again. And he finds these, folded sheets of paper. But what I want to point out, if you just scroll just a tiny bit, Dustin, a little bit more, perfect. Where, in the book, he finds the report and we see the report. But here in the script, he finds the report and you cut to he's telling Bellini. It's a report on the activities,
Yeah. I mean, there's nothing creakier than having the camera hold on a sheet of text, for the audience to read for like 10 seconds, or on a computer screen or something. So that's always too risky, I think, to do. So you're going to have to get that information over somehow by dialogue. And then you're just checking, is this believable? Is it believable that he's busy telling Bellini the same information that Bellini's busy reading? So it has to be kind of, you have to concentrate as much as possible and break it up. I think I put in the line because he says he's guilty of simony, and then starts to explain what simony is. So I have to have Bellini say, I know what simony is, because it's that's actually just there for the audience, But it's sort of worked in the sense, I felt it sort of worked that Lawrence's character is so fired up by what he's discovered. It's believable that he won't be quiet, And Bellini has to say, shut up, I'm busy reading it, basically.
Yeah. Well, I hope everyone's kind of like paying attention to this because it's just like the nuances of how you take something that's, in novel form and you make it into something that's, cinematic.
Yeah. I
Yeah.
mean, it's a kind of really basic rule with most, because most films are naturalistic, which I think is, just check what you've got a character saying and saying, do I believe it? Do I believe that they would say that? Does it sound natural that they would say this?
Mm-hmm.
And if not, then do something about it, And usually that just is like trim it down, break it up,
Mm-hmm.
find a way for this to become dialogue rather than monologue.
Right.
Make
Right.
it believable that someone's reading something out. You just have to always you're always fighting against the artifice of exposition.
Right. I know what simony is. Okay. So
By
let's
the way,
kind
I didn't know what simony was
yeah.
until
Actually, I'm not 100% sure that I know what, but so let's go to page 100. Okay, so just to catch everybody up, Bellini tries to get Lawrence to put the report back, citing in one of my favorite jokes in the script, he'd be the Richard Nixon of popes. And Sister Agnes, as we established, helps Lawrence make 108 copies of the report, which he distributes in the cafeteria. Again, somewhat Mean Girls like, which leads to everybody finally turning on Tremblay,
Yeah.
and Adeyemi calling him a Judas. So now we're on page 100. And this is one of my favorite scenes in the movie where Bellini and Lawrence are kind of talking after that big confrontation. And Bellini asks him if he's decided on a name because he's brought down Tremblay.
Yeah.
So, can you talk about writing this?
Yeah, I really like this scene as well. In the film, because I love Stanley's performance. I mean, I love Stanley's performance throughout the film, but I love it in this scene. And there's things like, I mean, I had a line there: "Ambition, the moth of holiness." Ambition is the moth of holiness was just a quote that I came across. I can't actually remember who says it, and I just liked it so much. But I remember putting it in and thinking, an actor will never make that sound natural. It sounds too written. But
Mhm.
then, but then you get Stanley, and Stanley can make it feel natural. So it's just another example of when really good actors are just a gift for the writer. They make things work that you think would be really difficult. But I guess one of the themes running through Conclave is that the seductive power of power.
Mhm.
It's kind of like the ring in Lord of the Rings. It's like the more you're around the center in the Vatican, the more the chances are you're going to get seduced by it and become ambitious and want to have that power for yourself. And Lawrence, who starts out right on the fringes, just as the kind of organizer of the event, as it were, he's not supposed to be involved at all, and who denies wanting to be pope because Bellini accuses him of this much earlier in the film. And he says, "I don't want to be pope." But at this point, he admits that he has actually prepared what name he would have if he was Pope. And it's true what Bellini says, that we all want to be Pope deep down, secretly. And
Mhm.
there's one person who doesn't, of course, and that's Benitez, who genuinely, I think we're supposed to believe, doesn't have any ambition to be Pope.
Right.
Yeah. So
Um,
it also felt like something, it's a nice, because they've been at odds with each other, it felt like a thawing of that hostility between them. Because not only is he agreeing that yes, I will try and defeat Tedesco by standing as Pope, but he's also admitting, yes, you're right. I guess I have harbored that ambition.
mhm. Mhm. Okay, so let's kind of scroll down to 101. That's where there's the explosion. And it sends the Cardinals into this debate about whether they should know what's going on the outside. And when they find out it was a terrorist attack, they get into this really thorny debate with Tedesco saying at the top of 106, like we tolerate Islam in our lands, but they revile us in theirs, and just going on this xenophobic rant, but bringing in this very real debate, that you imagine, probably happens amongst like cardinals. And at the bottom of the page, Benitez quietly speaks up and says, with respect, what do you know about war? Um, and on page 107, Very good, Dustin, very good. He gives this speech that essentially gets him elected Pope.
Yeah.
Um, can you talk about writing this speech?
Oh my God. More rewrites on this speech than any other part of the script. I mean, like I had 20 versions of this speech.
I
And I
imagine, yeah.
never ever again want to have to come up with a speech that's supposed to change the entire plot in
Yep.
about 30 seconds. I mean, it's just a nightmare. We were all thinking, is it going to work? Is it believable? Do we believe that Benitez changes the minds and hearts of the Cardinals? When does it feel too written? When does it, so yeah, there were lots of different versions, lots of different kind of arguments, lots of different directions this went in. And there was a couple of things that really helped. One was in the end, we said to Carlos, because originally he was doing it in English, we said do it in Spanish.
Mm, mhm.
It really helped because it allowed him, because obviously Spanish is his first language. It just became much more natural and it felt more emotional and it felt more from the heart. So that really helped. And then originally, I think in the script, it goes fairly quickly to the next vote. And what we
Mhm.
realized was it was really helpful if we could just have a few sort of visual moments where you see the Cardinals, walking, and you see the nuns walking, you see people eating, and there's a sense of that what he's just said sinking into them before you go in for that vote. A little bit of air, basically, for this moment to breathe, and that helped. Yeah, but I worried over this moment more than almost any other.
Yeah, I that's really insightful. I just kind of it makes the movie more like, I don't know, tangible or something with having you just like say like that you had to rewrite that so many times. That's really like um
I
cool.
literally I remember Googling speeches from other films and watching them and come out which
Yeah.
shamefully,
Yeah.
and because I was like, and they are out there, and it's like which ones work, which ones don't. Why does that one work? What can I steal? Uh,
Right.
and again, I tell you what it is. Actually, a lot of it was rhythm. You come to realize, as in the other thing I did was I looked at real powerful speeches from history, political speeches, sort of Martin Luther King and JFK and stuff. And you see how often those powerful speeches are. It's about repetition and rhythm. You get a sense of the effect that can have on the listener. But
Gotcha. Yeah. So let's move. We've got a couple of minutes left, so I want to cover all this other stuff.
sorry, I've been too long-winded.
Yeah, no, it's really great. Um, I just want to make a little note of this. When Lawrence Benitez does get elected Pope, and O'Malley like flags down Lawrence, and he's like, it wasn't a hospital, it was a clinic. My head was reeling when I saw this in the movie theater because I was like, what? And in the book, like it's much more specific. Like, they're like it's a clinic for gender reassignment, or and like I just think having this here where it's kind of vague, like causes that kind of like, oh no, like what's he talking about? What now? Like
There were lines in the book at that point, I think, which were I felt almost undeliverable from Monsieur O'Malley.
mhm.
It's such a this was another area that I'm sorry, I'll be as quick as I can with this one. This was another area
Yeah.
that I was really concerned about because I was aware that if we do it badly, it's like that, people from the trans community, I think, were very sensitive to like the crying game effect, where a sort of revelation about a character's gender comes as a kind of big twist, like a Dada moment. So there was that trying to reduce the sense of this being a twist, and I also was fighting against a notion that Benitez hidden this, because that's the other thing that dogs, often trans characters in depiction of trans characters, and not that Benitez is trans, by the way, but that sense that they're somehow complicit, they've hidden their identity to fool people. So
Mhm.
I was very sort of sensitive to those issues and tried to massage them as much as we could. So it felt important that the Benitez wants to talk to Lawrence about this. In fact, has been waiting for him to come, and that he is able to do this in his own words, to discuss what his situation is in his own words. And then the other thing about this was in the book, it's a different situation that Benitez is in, but I was really attracted to the idea that Benitez is intersex, because it's sort of on a metaphorical level felt really appropriate that he, as the line that I gave him, which is, I know what it is to exist between the certainties of the world.
Yes, which if you scroll a little bit, Dustin, we can actually show that line on page 115. The perhaps it's my difference that will make me useful, which I think is a great line.
Yeah. Because it's a patriarchy, and it's such a binary kind of world that they're used to, and a binary way of thinking. And Benitez, because he's intersex, escapes that conceptual net. You know what I mean? He doesn't fall into any of the labels that they would want to put on him.
Yes.
And that felt like the whole point, really, in a way, of Conclave, that there was this paradigm shift was happening, brought about almost against his will by Lawrence.
Yeah. Oh, wow. There's a lot to think about. Okay. Last two pages of the script, page 116 and 117, which find Lawrence sitting in his bedroom and the window is open, and letting in the air and the sun. And I just, as our final kind of wrapping it up, what can you talk about writing the final images of the script?
We tried lots of different endings. I always thought at first that we were going to have to go onto the balcony as the Pope faces the crowd, because we've been locked away from the world. Do we need to see that huge crowd that's been waiting outside? In the end, we thought we don't need to see that. That's not the point. Let's go with Lawrence and see what Lawrence does next when this is over and the doors are unlocked and the shutters come up. And we at one point we had him walking back down that hill that we opened with him walking up and walking past the cafe, and on the news, on the television in the cafe, you see the Pope has been elected. In the end, Edward just got this shot, which wasn't scripted particularly, well, it wasn't scripted at all. This shot of three young nuns running out of a building, laughing and talking, and he sort of thought that's the last image. And I agree. I think it's absolutely. I love that image. It's a really lovely ending to the film.
Yeah, I agree too. I think we've come to the end. It says the end.
It says the end. We must have, yeah.
Oh my God, this has been so great. I almost forgot that there's like a wildfire and stuff going on. So thank you so much. I know there were like a couple of questions in the chat, just about like subtitles and or the dual dialogue. Can you
can I just very quickly? I can say that it's a production draft that we're looking at there, and that's the very last draft, and that was done just before we started shooting.
Got it.
I didn't like when I was writing the draft. I didn't bother doing that. Obviously, I didn't do my own.
Got it.
Translation.
And there was someone too who wanted to know about like humor and Tedesco vaping, which we kind of covered. If you go back and you watch the recording, we sort of talked about humor.
Absolutely. I mean, I have to point out that was actually Sergio's idea, was to bring the vape and do it. I wish I could take credit for that, but that was the actor. It was a great idea. But that basic idea of anything that sort of seems inappropriate for the Vatican, we liked.
Yeah. Yeah, this was awesome. I want to go back and watch the movie again. Maybe I will tonight. And just thank you to everyone who tuned in. Thank you, Peter. Thank you for your time.
Thank you so much. I really enjoyed it.
Me too. And just have a great time with all the like recognition and stuff that that the film is getting, and it's deserved, and we will all be rooting for you.
Thank you very much. Yeah. Thanks a lot. Take care.
All right. Stay safe, everyone.
Stay safe, everybody. Yeah. Bye-bye.
Bye.